Welcome to the Sober and Happy podcast, where we talk about all things recovery related, how to navigate the challenges that we'll face along the way on our journey towards our best lives, and how we could go from living a life of simply just being sober to a life where we're both sober and happy. One of the most common frustrations I hear from people in recovery is when they've put together some time, but the people in their life still don't trust them. This may take the form of them always worrying or accusing them of sneaking drinks. Trust takes time to reestablish, but how long should it take? Are there ways that we could build this trust faster and better? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So buckle up. This is going to be a great episode. Welcome back. There was a point early in my sobriety this last time when I truly knew I was done. I had worn out all my excuses, and the thought of returning to how I was living disgusted me so much that any lingering temptation was quickly extinguished by the fear of returning to who I was before. As confident as I was, it didn't transfer to the people around me. Some walked on eggshells around me, worrying that if they even mentioned alcohol around me, it might tempt me to want to drink again. My mom still worried for months anytime she knew I was going to be around alcohol. And friends still often treated me like I was still the person that I was when I was drinking, even though I thought I had shown that I had changed. And I let it get to me. I knew that I could be trusted. I thought that I had demonstrated that I had changed. So why were these people still acting like I was someone who could not be trusted? So if you're going through this right now, I know exactly how you feel. In this episode, I will talk about how long it took me to start being trusted by the people around me finally, things that helped in that process, and how to handle situations when it seemed like no matter what I did, someone simply was not going to accept that I had changed. The most important factor is that we have to actually become the person we want them to perceive us as. When I got out of rehab, I was broke and without a job. At 34 years old, I found myself living with my mom again. I quickly got a job and began to put my life back together. Now, my mom didn't have many rules at her house, but one of them was that she didn't like dishes left in the sink. I was pretty good at this, but occasionally I'd leave a few dishes in the sink. I didn't think it was a big deal, but it annoyed her, and she would say something about it. I remember talking to a guy after a meeting one night and told him about this and how much it bothered me that my mom didn't treat me like an adult. He told me that he went through the same thing when he was living with his mom after getting sober and asked if I wanted to know what he said to her that made her start treating him like an adult. I told him I did, and I leaned in to hear his great words of wisdom. He said that he looked her in the eyes and said, "Mom, I'm moving out." The reality hit me that I was asking my mom to treat me like an adult even though I was back living at her house. Now, I found a place quickly afterwards, and my relationship with my mom started changing only then. My point is, if we want to be treated differently, we have to act differently. At this time, I was still getting back on my feet, and the place I found to rent was a trailer on the back of this guy's property. His brother would come over to see him a lot, and his two young boys would love to come over and play with my dog. Usually they'd knock on the door and ask if my dog could come out and play. I'd let her out and return to whatever I was doing. One time, I overheard the two boys having a conversation. I missed the first part of it, but as far as I could tell, the younger brother had lied about something, and the older brother, who was maybe 8 years old, was telling him that he needed to come clean to their dad. The younger one said, "But it was just a little lie." And the wisdom from the older brother not only blew my mind that it was coming from such a young kid, but it was exactly what I needed to hear at this time. He said, "If you think it is okay to lie about the little things, you will start thinking it is okay to lie about the big things." Now, at this time, I was 100% sober, but I was still sneaking around about other things. I'd still go to my old bar sometimes during the day to catch up with old friends. The first time I was confronted about this, without even thinking, I denied it. That was the thing about me becoming a chronic liar when I was still drinking. It became second nature to lie when confronted. They quickly pointed out that they saw my truck at the bar, and I came up with another bullshit story about having to swing by to drop off money I still owed to someone. I felt that they didn't fully believe me, but they dropped the subject. But as I heard that little boy giving advice to his brother, I knew two things. I had to come clean about the lie I told my friend, and I also had to change my behavior if I ever wanted people to trust me again. If I was still sneaking around and lying about other things, I couldn't expect people to trust me about me staying sober. If it was okay to lie about the little things, I will start thinking it is okay to lie about the big things. But even with those changes and consistently living as a person who could be believed and trusted, trust still didn't come overnight. Many people ask me, how long will it take to regain the trust with the people in our lives? The answer is, it depends. Gaining trust is not just about them believing what we say. People are healing from the damage we have caused, whether it is being hurt by our lying or being unreliable or from actions that have caused them even more harm. People have often heard our promises before. We told them that we were done in the past. We may have snuck around and hid our drinking before, so it's going to be natural for them to be a little apprehensive when we say that we are being honest this time. The only way I found to begin trust wasn't through my words. It was through consistently showing up over and over as a changed person until they could see it in their eyes that I truly have changed. I'll give you an example. I've known my friend Jack for probably 35 years now. I've known Jack well before I ever took a drink, and he watched me go through every phase of my drinking. From us having good times drinking together in our early 20s to watching me absolutely destroy my life multiple times with my drinking. One thing about me after my drinking got out of control is I was an absolute flake. Sometimes it was because I was a chronic blackout drunk, and I might have forgotten that last night I promised you that I would do something for you today. But many times it was because I already started drinking the next day, and continuing to get drunk took priority over showing up. This was a part of me that I absolutely hated. I had some really good friends in my life who would always show up for me, and I let alcohol take priority over being the same type of friend back to them. So as I sat in rehab and thought about this, I committed to myself that if nothing else, I would be someone that people could count on. If I said I would do something, I would do it. And that is something that I began doing from that day. That is who I was at my core, so this was an easy change for me, and I knew I was committed to it. However, it took Jack much longer to realize that I'd finally changed. Every time I told him I'd be at his house at 10 o'clock the next morning, I'd get a text about 8 o'clock reminding me and asking me if I was going to show up. This annoyed the hell out of me. I would think to myself, how many times do I have to show up until he could finally trust me that I'm not a flake anymore? I thought about confronting him one time when I was particularly annoyed after getting a text, but I ran it by another friend first. He asked me whether, in the grand scheme of things and considering everything me and Jack had been through, was it really a big deal? At that moment, I thought about everything I'd put Jack through during our friendship. All the times I didn't show up, the hurtful things I'd done when I was drunk, all the times he tolerated me when I was absolutely obnoxious, all the times he had to pick up empty beer cans and cigarette butts that I left in his garage after a night of drinking, the times that I lost jobs over my drinking and he let me crash on his couch until I got back on my feet. He was not berating me. He was not accusing me of drinking. He wasn't bringing up my past actions and holding them over my head. He was checking in to make sure I would show up because I had a bad habit of not being reliable for decades. This was a minor annoyance compared to what he has put up with. If he could continue to support me through everything I put him through, getting a little annoyed and responding with the text that said, "Yep, I'll be there," is the least I could do to support our friendship. Then, after being sober for about 6 months, I didn't get the reminder text one day. I was so used to getting them that I worried he overslept and I almost texted him to make sure everything was okay. I showed up at the scheduled time and the reminder text stopped after that. The point is that it took as long as it needed to. In that case, my job was to keep showing up until that happened. How long it takes is going to depend on many factors. How big was the betrayal to the other person? How many times did it happen and for how long? What type of relationship do we have with this person? And are they the type of person that is willing and able to trust us again? We must realize that people are healing and we must approach it that way. I found that instead of getting defensive, having compassion for what they are going through helps the healing process. For example, let's say you've lied in the past to your wife about working late when you're really going to the bar to meet up with your friends. Now you're sober and you actually had to work late. You get home and instantly you're confronted at the door and asked if you went to the bar. Now there's a few ways to handle this. The first is to get defensive and say, I've been sober for 3 months, I come home every night, and I can't even be trusted when I have to work late. How long do I have to put up with these accusations? First off, getting that defensive looks sketchy as hell. It makes it seem like you might have gone to the bar, so naturally that will actually raise more suspicions. What if you treated the situation by understanding her perspective that you lied to her for years when you said you were working late? With that, you could have compassion for her nervousness and acknowledge her past behavior, validate her feelings, and ask her if there's things you could do to alleviate her concern. You want bonus points? The next time you call her to tell her that you're running late at work, offer that instead of waiting until you get home to start dinner, ask her to meet you at her favorite restaurant instead. The key here is to stop being defensive and begin practicing having open conversations and working together on ways to build that trust that meet both your boundaries. I had one friend who, after being sober for about a year, wanted to start going golfing with an old friend again. Now, many of his past relapses have come while golfing with this friend, but he had never been sober this long before, and his friend had offered not to drink when they played together, so he felt comfortable doing it, but knew his wife would legitimately be concerned. So he asked her what would help her feel more comfortable, and they agreed to get a cheap breathalyzer he'd blow into after he got home. That didn't bother him, it made her feel more comfortable, and she actually never once asked him to blow into it. The fact that he was willing was enough to help her trust him again in that situation. Now, I know many of you right now may be thinking, I'm not going to blow in a damn breathalyzer to prove that I'm sober, and that's fine. This is what worked for both of them. The key is we must begin to have these open conversations if we want to start rebuilding trust again. Now, I have to mention a hard truth about this. Sometimes we might find that we have done too much damage to repair the trust with some people, or what they need to rebuild that trust is not something that we feel comfortable with. I knew another friend whose boyfriend didn't like her hanging out with their friends for similar reasons. When she talked to him about it, he wanted her to install a tracking app on her phone and also be willing to blow into a breathalyzer when she got home. She realized that personally for her, that was not the type of relationship she wanted to be in, and felt that because of several other trust issues that had lingered, it was best for them to split up. The key is that we must be willing to show up to the table and ensure that we do our part to rebuild the trust. How fast it happens, or whether it happens at all, is out of our hands, and we can't force it either way. Now, from my experience, 95% of the people in my life showed me full trust within a year. For the other 5%, there simply was no way of repairing it, and I decided it was best to move on from those relationships. And that was okay. It was their choice not to move on from the past, despite my best efforts, and I couldn't move on from the past myself if I kept people like that in my life. I have no hard feelings for them, and I respect their reasons for not wanting to trust me. However, I don't focus on that 5% because it would keep me from enjoying the other 95%. So if you're still struggling with people trusting you, remember the key points. Show up consistently as the person you want to be seen as. Don't lie about the little things. Have compassion for their side of the situation, and be willing to have open, honest conversations with the people in our lives. If you do those things, you will not only see your trust being built with the people in your lives, but your relationships can grow even stronger. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. Here's your weekly challenge. This one is a challenge and a favor I'm asking from you rolled into one. I know many of us struggle asking for help. I want you to think of one thing you're struggling with that you'd like to hear discussed in a future podcast episode. Either DM me on Facebook or Instagram, where you could find me with the handle @IamSoberAndHappy, or email me at tim@soberandhappy.com. I'd appreciate the help coming up with future topics, and I would love to hear from you. That is my challenge for you this episode. New episodes come out each Friday, so I look forward to connecting with you next week. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and keep living sober and happy.